All right, everybody. Welcome to episode 23 of Circle Up and Get Real. You know what happens when you get together with your peeps? You circle up and you feel like you can be real with them. And I need to tell you all today, I have met Sally Helgesen for the first time maybe 10 minutes ago, but I feel like I know her because I've been listening to two of her books. And Sally, if I had only met you earlier in my career, I mean, have had a great career, don't get me wrong. Yet I feel like I could have been so much further along. So, everybody, I want to introduce you to Sally Helgesen, who is cited in Forbes as the world's premier expert on women's leadership. Where have you been all my life? She's a speaker, a leadership coach. For 30 years, her mission has been to help women recognize, articulate, and act on their greatest strengths and help organizations build more inclusive cultures. And Sally, you've written several books, and I know you live in New York, and we have friends in common. We have mutual connections on LinkedIn, which I'm digging into as well. So welcome, 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 Sally.
Thank you, Jody. It's wonderful to be here.
So I always ask a lot of questions. I'm very inquisitive and curious. And I know where you are now, Sally, and I know that you've been working for 30 years and you've worked with some amazing people, and we're going to dig into this book because this is so, for me, earth shattering. But I'd like to know how you got to be who you are. What's your background? Where are you from? Tell us a little bit about you before we get into the specifics, if you would.
Sure, Jody. I'm from Kalamazoo, Michigan. That's where I grew up. And I always knew I wanted to be a writer. I was the teen page correspondent for my Kalamazoo St. Augustine High School. So that was kind of for me, it was a big deal. And I won a state journalism prize. So I always knew that I wanted to be a writer. I came to New York in the middle of college. It was back in the 60s. And have been a professional writer my entire adult life, really, since I was 19. I've never earned a penny except writing or speaking about what I've written.
Wow.
So that, and I've done everything. I did a lot of journalism. I did advertising, copywriting very early in my career. And I got interested in business when I went down to Texas and did a book about independent oil producers in the late 70s when it was a boom time. So I got really interested in how business worked in doing that project. And I started doing speech writing in the 80s for companies. And that was a wonderful career, but it was the first time I'd had an association with big organizations. I was always on contract. I didn't want to work for them, but I had real close up. And it was astonishing to me how little the organizations, which were really good ones, how little they understood what women could contribute as leaders. And so I became very curious about that, and I wanted to write something that I thought would be helpful for organizations in understanding what women had to offer. So I chose a number of what were at that time America's best women leaders, and I did diary studies of them, which was really, really fun. Rather than interviewing them, I followed them around and took notes on what they did so I could convey a sense of what their leadership style was. And that became the book, The Female Advantage, Women's Ways of Leadership, which I'm very happy to say was the first book that focused on what women could contribute as leaders rather than how they needed to change and adapt, which is every book in the 1980s focused on, whether it was popular or academic. So I think because it was first, and because the women that I focused on were very intriguing, the book became extremely successful. And all of a sudden, overnight, I was viewed as someone who knew something about women's leadership, and companies started calling me in. Can you speak to us? Can you consult on the Women's Leadership Initiative we're beginning to develop? It was that kind of combination of great timing 1990, and having the right message. So I followed it up with a book called The Web of Inclusion, which was for organizations looking at some of the benefits of leading in an inclusive way. And this is before diversity and inclusion were even paired. So it was really acknowledged as putting the language of inclusion into the business world. So I just went on from there, I thought this is a topic that I can stay with my whole life. It is of great importance to me. It's a very rich topic. And so I have stayed with it. I've written 7 books in this field and given tens of thousands of talks in person until March 10th,
Right.
and now doing it virtually. And it has taken me all around the world. I have worked with women in Pakistan and Malaysia and Egypt and Brazil, all over the map. And it has been a very, very rich and rewarding.
Wow. Okay, so I have tons of questions.
Okay.
I warned you. So as a young person, you said you were in Michigan and you were 20, 19, and you left and you went to Texas?
No, I went to New York City. I went to New York City
okay.
10 years, and then I went down to Texas. I think I was about 28 when I went to Texas for about a year and a half to do that book.
Okay. So when you left Michigan,
yes.
Why did you leave Michigan? Why would anybody leave the Midwest, Sally? Come on.
I love Michigan. I know it sounds really weird, and it had to be 1968 for someone to understand this, but my roommate's mother had moved from Akron, Ohio to New York City and needed 2 roommates. And I thought, here's my chance to go live in a big city. So I joined her and another woman who subsequently became quite a successful Broadway actress from Akron. And I took advantage of that opportunity. My parents were very surprised, but I felt that it was an interesting career move for someone who wanted to be a writer.
Right.
I had imagined myself pursuing that either through getting a job at a newspaper or probably getting a job at a newspaper or through an academic career. But then I thought, I'll just go to New York and be a writer. I had sort of a image of myself as a beatnik or whatever. Yeah. And, it was 1968. So it was the kind of thing that would be very difficult to do today without virtually any support.
Right. Oh my gosh, that's so romantic. It just sounds so amazing. I love that. So you're young and you're gutsy. I mean, maybe, would you say you were gutsy? Would you say you were?
In retrospect, I didn't feel gutsy. I just felt it didn't seem that unusual to me. In retrospect, I could see that it is.
Because that changed everything for you then.
It did. I ended up, writing professionally. I got into advertising. It was, the Mad Men era. It was quite serious. And then I worked as an assistant for a columnist at a newspaper and, just kind of followed that. And then ended up going back to college in New York City.
Okay.
And so it was again, I have to say, this is a very different time, and I don't think it would be very difficult for a young person. I knew nobody. I had no connections. No one from my high school, my hometown, etc., was there. I just had this opportunity to have an apartment for a while, and I thought, I'm going to give this a shot.
Wow. And you became a writer, which is what you wanted to be. And the first thing you said, you've only made money writing. And that is so unusual now, because isn't it something like 6 or 8 careers that kids are going to have before they figure out what they want to be when they grow up?
Yeah. And again, you could live very cheaply in New York then. And so that was really helpful to me. But yeah, I have only ever earned money either writing or speaking about my
Mm-hmm,
writing. So
mm-hmm.
in the years since, and then I've added coaching, but the coaching is usually about my writing. So that has really been the mark. And I don't want to make it sound like everything was easy or
No,
glamorous.
no, for sure.
There were some very, when I questioned my wisdom in doing this path, but it always just, there was enough going on to stick with it.
Mm.
I've learned the virtues of persistence, of showing up, and of longevity. There are a lot of them. And so I think I benefited from that.
So in the Mad Men era, because I loved that show and it was really fun. Was it like that? Was it like?
It was like that. It was so raw, and it was the era of the 3 martini lunch. And so I was a kid and I was the low person on the totem pole. I mean, I was writing copy for light bulb filaments. That's what I was at. But, I was around all these, mostly guys, but a couple women who were so glamorous to me, who were advertising copywriters or art directors. And it was a very raw time. It was, it had this sort of 60s ethos. And somehow I was able to just sort of go with that without getting sucked into things. But it was very sexist
Well,
environment.
I was going to ask about that because this whole Me Too movement we've been aware of in the last couple of years now. That you must have lived that. I lived that, and I didn't have that much of a glamorous lifestyle as you did living in North Dakota. But it was there. It was there. There is sexism. There just had been.
It was there, and it was everywhere. I mean, you'd get into the subway and somebody grab you. It was part of how life was, and we didn't think you had to navigate it. You had to know who was a problem and who wasn't a problem, and you'd hear who was a problem. And I remember in the 70s going to Studio 54, and you would hear a lot about a certain person who's quite prominent today, and to stay out of his orbit. So that was part of it. And I think it's fantastic that women today have the courage to stand up. And even more than the courage, to me, what Me Too demonstrates is the solidarity that women have evolved. Mm. Because coming up back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, women tended to feel, with good reason, that only one of you was ever going to be successful. And so women were pretty, could be very competitive with one another. There were certainly many women who were not, and who were wonderful mentors, but it was common. And I think what I've seen with Me Too especially is women having much greater solidarity with one another. And that's been one of the reasons that I think it's been easier for women to become successful, because they have a real, a circle, your peeps, as you said at the beginning, you've got that support. And without that, you can't move forward.
Right. Oh, this is so great. So, I just have so many things I'd like to ask you about. I had an opportunity in 2004 to work with an organization that you've mentioned in some of your work. And I was not supposed to ever say the name, but it's 2 letters. That's an E and a Y. And in that organization, they had a track that they wanted to encourage women to become partners. And so I got to work with an organization that came in and said, we want to figure out how to give women the kind of perks and benefits that men would have in this organization, where men would want country clubs and cars, and women just didn't want that. So they were trying to create this opportunity to have women partners. There was a man in charge of this, and he really wanted to encourage these women to be on that partner track. And so I got to come in with this organization called Intra Assets and teach. My part was about networking and teach the women how to business network, not just find out how your kids are and how,
how to leverage relationships.
Exactly. And that was so much fun for me, because we had, I think there were like 100 about 100 women from all over the US who were part of this organization, who were having conversations about things that mattered in a space that they felt secure, felt a little like my Get Real circle. I want people to feel that they can be real. And one thing I learned about those women in that circle, and it was probably because one of them happens to be from a small town in North Dakota, which was about, I don't know, 50 miles from where I first started my first job as a journalist. And she and I went, do you know, do you know, do you know? And we just were talking, and all these women are watching us going, what is going on? And I said, this is what happens when you know somebody and when you live in North Dakota. And we had this great conversation. And then she came and took me aside later and said, can I just be completely honest with you? And I said, absolutely. And she said, I don't want to be a partner in this organization. They've targeted me to move up. And she said, I see what the men have to do. I see what happens when they have to take this on. I don't want that. And that conversation that we had then kind of evolved into another conversation. They brought in, do you know who Gail Owens is?
Yes.
They brought in Gail Owens to speak. And so Gail was there in this conversation, and this organization asked her, the only organization she'd ever spoken with, they asked her if she would censor her speech for them.
Yeah.
And she said, I have never been asked to do that before. And this organization, I think, is at the point right now in their career where they really are pushing for women to do this thing, be partners. And they didn't ask the women.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm wondering about your experience with that type of situation.
Well, I think that was more common than it is now. And it was very common in the years leading up to about 2010. I would say in the years before the financial meltdown, and the way we've restored things since then has been really interesting. But I would hear that all the time, and I would primarily hear it in partnership firms. I would hear it in law firms and accounting and consulting firms. I've gotten close enough to see what a partner's life looks like, and I don't want that. That was very common with women. And I think that what I've seen is that organizations have gotten more flexible and have begun to recognize that and this is not just true with women anymore, but it's true with men and women, that people want different things in different ways at different stages in their careers. And that's okay. So that if women have a desire to move into a partnership situation a bit later, rather than, oh, well, it's up and out by age, whatever, which used to be sort of the model, that there's more flexibility now. So that's been a positive. There are more ways of being partners. One of the big four accounting firms in the 90s pioneered being on the partnership track with a part-time job, which was really a big deal. And then I think, again, I have to say the greater solidarity women have, and seeing some comfort in numbers has made it much easier. So to me, that was a very characteristic issue that I saw being raised in a certain period of time, the period after about 1999, when firms decided they really wanted women as partners, and the period before the financial meltdown, when women were kind of skeptical of that.
Mm-hmm. So I want to get to this book. I know there's probably a lot more we could talk about, the way how you got where you are, because you have such a great history that I'm so interested in. But I want to talk about this book that changed my life. I'm not even kidding. This book, How Women Rise, that I had no idea how I even stumbled across it, but I got it in Audible version. And that would have been, I'm going to say, March of this year. And this book was written in 2018, so it's not cutting edge new, but it's new. And I had read Marshall Goldsmith's book, What Got You Here Won't Get You There, back in the late 2000s. And I just thought that's the way it worked. And if you don't know this book, Marshall Goldsmith gives 20 things.
Habits and behaviors that are most likely to get in the way of successful.
Yes. What got you here won't get you there. People in general, everybody, right? And so these 20 characteristics, I read the book and I said, okay, here's what it is. And I had no idea it could be different than that
Mhm.
until I saw this book. And this book is called How Women Rise, Break the 12 Habits Holding You Back. And you wrote this book with Marshall Goldsmith, who apparently the two of you got together because somebody suggested you meet and do this project.
Well, that was a mutual friend said, I think you should collaborate on this, but it had been in my mind for a while. Marshall and I have been good friends for almost 30 years. We met at a Drucker Foundation event in San Diego in the early 90s. We've remained close ever since. And when in around 2014, 15, I was doing a lot of workshops for women on vision. I'd written a book called The Female Vision, Women's Real Power at Work. And so I was doing, the book wasn't very successful, but the workshops were very successful. And I started to use some of Marshall's material from What Got You Here Won't Get You There. And it was so apparent to me when I was trying to use it that the concept was brilliant. The idea that the same habits and behaviors that serve you well early in your career can hold you back as you seek to move to a higher level, and yet you remain loyal to them because they got you where you are. So I thought the template was brilliant, but I also saw that the behaviors he singles out represented his coaching base. He drew from his 40 years as an executive coach, and he mostly works with male CEOs, to maybe 15, 20% women, very high achieving guys. And I did not see some of those habits at all as holding most women back. Learn to apologize. Oh, really? You think so? Don't always talk about how great you are, stuff like that. So I had suggested to Marshall that we think about collaborating, and he liked the idea. And then we had a mutual friend who had written an email and said, oh, you two have to do this book together, because he was doing some women's leadership stuff. And so I struck while the iron was hot, and Marshall loved it. And it was a fantastic collaboration. And it's been really successful. And I learned so much by working with him, especially about how to market a book. He's pretty much a genius at that. And I was not. And so it was really, really powerful. And I was able to use some of his network. But really the behaviors, 11 of the 12 are drawn very much from my own experience working with women and delivering women's leadership workshops for when I wrote the book had been about 27 years.
Wow. Well, I'm going to tell you which two were the ones that just hit me like a ton of bricks. And the one that was especially important to me was only number 2. I mean, I couldn't even get down the list because number 2 to me, you guys, I have to tell you, if you know me, if you've been listening to this podcast, I've talked about this before. Number 2 is expecting others to spontaneously notice and reward your hard work.
Yes.
And when I listened first, and then I went back and read, but I listened to the stories about the women you had a man and a woman who came into a partner firm, and both had aspirations to become partner. And the woman did what everybody does. I didn't know it any other way. You do great work. You come in and you dot all the I's, cross the T's. You do 100% of the job, and you do it very well with your head down. And then you look to your right and you find this male colleague of yours who has come in to do about 70% of the work, whatever, because he's got his sights set on partner and he's telling everybody he's going to be a partner. And who do you suppose gets promoted first?
Yeah.
And then I'm thinking, this poor woman you're talking about, I'm like, well, what is she, chopped liver? She's doing all the work. And as you're talking about this story, I'm thinking, this is my life. This has been my life. I had no idea there was another way to do it. I thought you do good work and you're rewarded for it.
It just doesn't really work that way. And part of the reason it does is that people aren't noticing that much. And what I've learned really since writing the book and doing a lot of workshops subsequently is the extent to which every great career is built on three legs. It is built on expertise, that is how good a job you do, on visibility, how much people know about what you're doing and contributing and what you aspire to, and also your connections, which is a route to being more visible. And what I've realized that I've watched women do is underinvest in visibility and connections in order to put their emphasis on expertise, on doing the work, right. And it has been, and it's helpful to a lot of women to learn that's not going to get you there. Yeah. And it's not that it should get you there. And what I think is so important about this behavior is that so many women feel bad when they're not the one who gets the promotion and they did a better job. And that's why it's so important to understand that doing a great job is only part of it. Generally, it's also getting known for the job that you've done, making sure that's part of your job, and building the connections that will enable you to do that.
Oh, because, and I love this part, because if you're really good at the job that you're doing at an entry level, then you become indispensable to the people who are going above you, because they need you. You've done such a great job.
Oh, I did a program in Atlanta at a law firm about a year ago when we were still traveling. And this woman came up at the end and she said, you know, when I came into this firm, it's a very prestigious global firm that's headquartered in Atlanta. She said, I saw that they didn't have anybody who was really great at doing briefs. She said, so I decided that I was going to become the best brief writer in the firm and in the world. She said, I just threw my heart and soul into writing a great brief. She said, I achieved it. It's 14 years later. I'm writing everybody's briefs because she said, I haven't made partner because everybody wants me to do their brief. She said, and part of me feels good about that. And part of me feels like, just like you said, what am I, chopped liver? You know, really? I mean, I'm supposed to do your brief? So, but she set herself up and she said, I never really realized until this program we were doing the role that I played in making that happen.
Oh, see, this awareness is painful because when it's painful, I mean, that's good because it means that you're learning. I'm learning. This is how I learn. And sometimes when I was listening to this the first time, I thought, well, why do I have to be the one to shift? Why is it that the women are the ones who have to shift? Why can't the men figure out that doing a good job is something to be rewarded? And then I thought, because you talk about that, that's not the way it is. That's not the way it is.
Doesn't really, and there's no reason to say it should be. You know, one of the great things I learned from Marshall, who's been just a great resource in my life, he said, you know, the dumbest thing anyone could say is, you would think someone at that level would, or I believe someone at that level should. It's not important. Accept reality. Accept reality. And actually, when you think about it, if you're in a position of leadership, you also are looking for people who are good at visibility and who have a lot of, you know, a good broad network. You're not just looking at, oh, well, that person is really good at doing the job. They don't have any connections. They have their head down the whole time. Nobody knows what they're doing, but I'm going to hire them because of that. When you see someone like that, you tend to think of them as a subject matter expert rather than a potential leader. So it's not just that it's the unfairness, it's that it took women a while to be cued into this. And me too.
Well, and that's the thing, because I look back and go, but, that's why I said I wish I would have met you sooner. I wish I would have known this sooner, because I feel like I could have been something more, yet everything is in perfect timing. Everything is perfect. Yeah. And just a couple more that I think are so important here. All of them are. But ruminating, I hadn't thought about that one. But women ruminate. I ruminate. I think about it over and over and over and over and oh, I should have done that and I should have done that. And why? To your point, why? Move
I
on.
don't know why it is. I mean, there's fantastic research. It was done mostly at Yale about rumination, and women do it. It confirms women ruminate. That is, go over and over. Why did I do that? What an idiot! How could I have? They must think. Oh, I guess I'm not ready to. Whatever it is, we do that to ourselves, and we all it's just very, very common, and it needs to be pointed out. And I think that those of us who do it believe that somehow going over and over and over what we messed up is going to make us not make the same mistake again. But what the research indicates is that that's not true, that basically the main function of rumination, the main outcome, is to make you feel bad. So then you lose confidence, and then you don't feel as good, and you're actually more likely to act on whatever it was that you regret.
Oh my
And
goodness.
it's very interesting. You know, when Marshall and I did the pitch for the sales force at the publisher, it was a big group. It was like about 500 people. And we each had to say something about the book, and I said a few things, and Marshall stood up, and I don't remember exactly what he said, but I sure remember his line. He said, you know, one of the great things about this book is it's going to support more women leaders. He said, and that's a very good thing, because the latest research that's come out shows that women are better leaders than men. You can make that as a general statement. More women are really superb leaders than men are. And he said, so for men, the bad news is that we're not as good leaders. But the good news is we don't care.
Oh, yeah.
I just loved it because it kind of embodies, you know, this is making a big generalization. There are men who care, there are men who ruminate, there are men who give themselves a hard time. But it's much more common with women, and it does not serve us. Men move on. We need some kind of mantra to just move us past.
Right. Well, to your point about that, I know we don't have a lot of time left, and I could talk to you forever. I've been ruminating. No, not in a bad way. I've been thinking about this concept that you talk about with female male, and I've been thinking about it more in terms of energy, and I think about it more in terms of feminine energy, which is more magnetic, and masculine energy, which is more dynamic. And so, because of what I've learned from you, I'm thinking about the concept of radar and laser.
Mhm.
And pink has radar, blue has laser. This doesn't necessarily mean all men and
Really?
all women, right?
Well, that's so interesting.
And think about pink is more relationship, blue is more about transaction.
Yeah.
And so, I know a lot of blue women. We have a friend in common, Lorianne. I think she's got a lot of blue energy in her. She's very dynamic.
Yeah.
And so if we think about it less as a male female thing, I think there's an opportunity to move into this, what I'm calling purple space. So I bought the domain purpledialogue.com, and I want to create something in that space because like you said, I know men who are pink. I know men. In fact, back when I was working with this company in Chicago, I learned from Gail Evans that she called it good men at the time. The men who didn't want to work 80 hours a week, who wanted to be home with their kids, who wanted to do that and didn't have a place because they were supposed to be what men are. And I think what you've uncovered in this book for me is almost the next step into being not a gender thing, but an energetic thing. And that's
I think that you're right. And I do think that it's the next step. You know, I really look at this in a big picture way. And I think that the discovery of what our strengths is most effective when it serves almost an evolutionary path where some of these differences would break down. Since the day the book came out, I have had men tell me I identified with these three behaviors. This book describes me. I've heard that over and over, especially from African American, Latino men, Indian men. men who are sort of outside the mainstream white guy leadership culture in the US, but also from some really, really top male, more mainstream leaders. And so I've really come to think of it as the habits that got left out of Marshall's original book. Because he was drawing from a very specific population, and that these are common. So I think as we can use some of what we're learning about ourselves and one another to move beyond some of the stereotyping, which serves us at a certain stage, and to look at what the commonalities are, then I think that it will serve our evolution as men and women. And there's so much, one of the things that I become aware of in my work is that this is really the first time, and this is quite something to think about, that men and women have used the same technology in their work. It's never been true. When I graduated from high school, I got a typewriter for my charm bracelet because it was going to show I was going to be a career gal. But the typewriter was a symbol of women's post-industrial workplace participation. Before that, it was the loom. Before that, it was, digging with a spade in the ground, and the men had, take it back to the hunter-gatherer era, that men and women have always used different tools. And one thing we know about using the same tool is then you begin to have more common skills and more common language. So I think that's part of the evolution that's happening here. And my hope is that this book serves that evolution in a positive way.
Oh, it sure did for me. And I've been talking about it to everybody I can think of right now. So I tell you, this is expanding my awareness in such a way that it is allowing me to not be so upset about the things that I thought they were doing to me.
Yes, that's really important. If they're not noticing what you're doing, partly it's just a laser focus.
Right.
It's not them disrespecting you. And partly it's that they're used to people pointing out what they're doing. Men. In most organizations, they're used to people pointing out, did you see I did this? Did you see our team did this? And the role I played was X, and this is where I want to go. This is what my aspirations are. So they're accustomed to that.
Yeah.
And that's helpful information for us to know.
It sure is. So you told me before we came on here that you had a little story that you wanted to share about being real, and our Get Real Circle would love to hear that, Sally.
Yes, again, it goes back to my dear friend Marshall, but on March 6th, which was the day California was locking down, Marshall and I were co-delivering a big women's leadership program at eBay out in the Bay Area. And we were actually told, it was a morning program, we were told that if it had been in the afternoon, it would have been canceled. Wow. Because they were shutting. And it was really apparent being out in San Jose what was coming at us there. I was one of 6 people in one of the largest Marriotts in the country. And as he was heading off to the airport, I was staying overnight because I had something in Palo Alto. He said to me, Sally, I want you to think about using this time, however long it is. Of course, at that point, we thought it'd be about 3 months. I want you to think about using this time to do 3 things: to build your brand, to stay connected, and to be real. And it really had an impact on me. And I made a little sign and put it above my desk that reminded me of that. And the being real has been really interesting, because one of the things I've noticed about switching my work from being on stage to being on Zoom mostly is that it creates an opportunity for real intimacy and for being real and dropping some of the performance skills that work well on stage, but don't translate. Translate is a little bit inauthentic when you're in this very up close medium. So it has been it was really one of the most helpful things anybody said. To me, build your brand always means the same thing. It means do a lot of free work.
Yeah, right.
So that's part of building your brand. Staying connected is nurturing my network and really showing up for it. And then thirdly has been that. And I think it's really served me well presenting to people in a virtual environment.
That's brilliant advice. You know what I've recognized from Zoom?
But
You and I look the same when I'm looking at Zoom. I can see myself and I can see you. And I've never seen myself present or listen before.
oh, really?
So how would I? If I'm on stage, I have no idea how I'm listening.
Exactly. You don't know. You don't know.
So I watch, I know this is going to sound weird, but I watch later to see how I listen, to see what I'm doing when you and I are the same. We're right here, the same, in two little boxes on a screen. And for me, that's given me such a different perspective that I don't think I ever would have had in this way. And so we're recording this on Zoom so that we can see each other and have a real conversation.
Exactly.
And then I will be putting it up on the podcast, which will be just audio. But the video, you're going to want to see this. I will put this up on YouTube because I love how you listen, how you listen to me. And I feel that on Zoom the way I never would in an audience.
Yeah. I think that's one of the opportunities we have now is I've been a reporter essentially for 50 years. So I've listened to a lot of people. I've interviewed a lot of people, and I feel that somehow presenting on this medium takes me back to that experience.
Yeah, I can see that. I started my career as a journalist as well.
Yeah.
My first 3 years were in a weekly newspaper as a news and sports editor.
Oh, wonderful.
So I know we have so many things in common. I am just so grateful, so grateful, Sally, that you took the time to be with me today and our people on our Circle Up and Get Real podcast. If somebody wanted to get a hold of you, Sally, or to learn more about you, is it just your website, sallyhelgesen.com?
Yeah, sallyhelgesen.com or LinkedIn. I do connect through LinkedIn. I don't, I'm on the other social media, but I don't necessarily respond to them. The stuff gets posted. But I'm active on LinkedIn and build up a circle, and a lot of times invitations for clients or to coach or whatever come in through LinkedIn.
And I just want to notice that you posted something really recently on LinkedIn that you were recognized by global gurus as the #6 top leadership thinker in the world.
on leadership. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And you were supposed to be gathering in Bali.
We were.
But here you are in your home office is receiving this great award. Oh my God.
Personally, I'd rather be in my home office. I'm going to Bali, I have to say.
Yeah. So congratulations on that.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And I'm grateful that you've spent some of that thinking time with me.
I've really enjoyed it, Jody. I really enjoyed speaking with you.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to I have to wake this back up. I'm going to